Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the mClassic, or specifically the new line of mClassics called the RGB Collection. Before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel, etc. I appreciate all the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. Now, the structure of this video. First, we're going to talk a little bit about like what the mClassic is and its general purpose and all that sort of stuff. Then we'll kind of talk about these new models and specifically like what they do differently. And at the end, we'll kind of give final thoughts and like what the use case is and what you really kind of need to know, etc. So this is going to be a little bit of a video. So grab some food, maybe a drink. Let's get into it. Now, first we're going to talk about the OG original mClassic. That would be the red one here. Now, this one came back out in 2019. I did a video on it. I did actually multiple videos on it. I think is an absolutely perfect complementary device for various video game consoles. And the basic idea with it was that it's a post-processor you connect to a video game console, and it does additional things like upscaling, anti-aliasing, color enhancement, etc., to generally improve the image. It had a few other options, including an off mode, what they call a full processing mode, as well as a 4x3 mode that was designed for retro. But those two modes were basically a one-size-fits-all solution that kind of just approached every single bit of game content exactly the same way. But the good people at Marseille decided to make some changes and some updates. And I should mention, of course, that this video, the mClassics here were given to me for free for the purposes of review by Marseille. So first of all, full disclosure on that, but link in the description if you want to check it out. They currently have an Indiegogo campaign where they're selling them, and that's how you can get early access to them and all that. So they sent these to me very early on, to the point where the bottom of the boxes still says pre-production. So they told me that basically the units are final. They're probably going to change things about the box, but the actual hardware bits are exactly the way they are intended to be, which is very cool. Okay, now you might have noticed there isn't one for the red one. We'll start there. The original mClassic, like I said, I quite enjoy it, and I thought it was a pretty solid device. So they have a new red one that they're referring to, I think, as the OG Plus. And to my understanding in talking to them, it's effectively exactly the same thing with only one change, which I don't have the new one. I want to point that out because the only change they made didn't apply to me. Basically, so, a lot of TVs, there's a common complaint, and I've seen it in the comment sections of my videos. There's a common, I would say, misunderstanding that your TV has a built-in upscaler. Therefore, what is the point of this? This is snake oil, blah, blah, blah. Well, the thing is, this actually does the job well. The built-in scaler you have on your TV is junk. It's just kind of generic and meant to upscale in general to hit a benchmark, but doesn't actually do a good job of that process. The idea is that this actually does a competent job and your TV gets a much better display. However, there are certain TVs that were made after the mClassic that was released that actually go out of their way to try and block it from functioning. Turns out Samsung in particular was very guilty of this. So the newer version of the OG mClassic actually does an update where it now detects basically that you're running it on a TV that's trying to block it, and it circumvents it and just makes it work. That is essentially the only difference between this red one and the newer OG Plus red one, to my understanding. So as a result, there isn't really much else for me to say on it because A, I don't have it, and B, I've already done videos on it to death. So we're basically just going to move on and talk about the two new ones. Now, we'll do a little mini unboxing here of the blue one, which is specifically designed for the Nintendo Switch. Once you get inside of it, you'll see that it comes with not only the dongle itself, but underneath that, it also includes things like a red USB micro cable that is just designed there specifically to provide power, as well as a little HDMI extension cable. And the purpose of that is that the mClassic's shape is interesting, but it does not allow it to actually fit natively into the Nintendo Switch dock. So to that end, they included this. That also allows you, honestly, with other platforms to connect it more readily in case the mClassic just happens to be an odd shape in whatever you want to connect it to. So that was just a convenience thing. And then on top of that, they include a little user guide manual that has some information on basically how to connect it, what's in the box, things like required items. So like they recommend, of course, a high-speed 4K HDMI cable or a USB power source if you want to use something different than this. And which direction to plug it in, you know, that kind of thing. And then they actually have bits of information on like what they call the processing mode and retro mode and all that sort of stuff. The coolest thing though, they actually have a right here, sorry, I lost it. It's actually a sheet on compatibility. So it basically will tell you straight up all the resolutions that are supported, not supported, and what resolutions to expect depending on the source resolution. Like, so for example, if you put in a 480i signal at 60 hertz, the output would be 480i because it's not actually supported. The minimum resolution supported for this thing is 480p. So once you do that, if you put in 480p at 60 hertz, you would actually get 1080p or 1440p. I should have mentioned that before. The output resolution on this thing is 1440p. If you do not have a 1440p compatible monitor, 1080p is what you will get. It is not 4K. That must be stressed. The only 4K output that is supported, at least on the original one, to be fair, I didn't test it with these two because it's not really relevant to them, is like Blu-ray content or DVD content, etc. Just video is basically where I'm going with that. For game purposes, the most you will get out of it is 1440p. It supports 480p, 576p, 720p, 1080p, and 2160p, aka 4K. However, if you're using 4K, it's just going to effectively bypass it. It doesn't really do anything with that. If you use 1080p, by the way, and you output to 1080p, even through this, even though the resolution is the same, you still get the other color benefits and enhancements, anti-aliasing, that kind of thing. That, in a nutshell, is kind of what the mClassic always really did. So they decided to make two new ones that specifically focus on two subgenres. Now, we already mentioned that there's one for the Switch, and we will go over that in a minute. And then they also made one that they call the Retro mode, or Retro one. Yeah, I think they specifically call it the Retro. And that one is built a little differently for other purposes. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to focus more on the Switch one. And so you guys don't have to just sit here like staring at me. We're going to cut away to some Switch gameplay. This is footage that was just recorded playing with this device in one of the modes, and I'll put it on the screen which one it was and all that, and you can just enjoy that while I'm sitting here talking about it. So as we sit here and look at the mClassic Switch edition, what exactly is the difference? Well, the original mClassic, like I said, it had three modes. It had off, it had on, and then it had on in 4x3. This one does not have an off mode. That's actually intentional. Instead of using an off mode, because they really only had three options, if you look at the thing, it has a little dongle on it that has a little switch on it that allows for three different settings. They decided, apparently, to not have an off mode, and that way they could have it do something else. So one of the modes is what they just call the continued full processing mode. So effectively, it's the exact same full processing mode that's in the red mClassic is now available as the standard built into the blue Switch version. And then they have two additional modes. Now, Mode 1. My understanding of Mode 1 in kind of communicating with them and reading like their press kit and all that sort of thing was basically when they were playing on the Nintendo Switch. Like the original one, as I said, was kind of a one-size-fits-all deal. But they really recognized that the Switch really benefited from the mClassic, but they thought they could do a better job fine-tuning it. So, as I understand it, within their office, if you think about it, they had a Switch, right? And they were playing it portably. If you are playing a Switch portably, the visual experience is very different than when you play it on a television. Now, there's a few different reasons for that. Namely, of course, the resolution can be different, the different types of monitors, etc. But basically, when it comes to the portable mode, Nintendo had a uniform consistent in the screen. As far as the only thing the user could really change was the brightness to some extent. Granted, they eventually made an OLED monitor, but even then, those are two control scenarios where Nintendo can basically make the games look ideal on those two particular types of screens. Whereas when Nintendo created the Switch dock to go along with it, they basically just did so as a convenience thing. They're like, all right, look, you can play your portable games on the television, and the television, you'll get a little bit of additional power out of the Switch dock itself, but beyond that, it's not really going to do much to enhance anything. And you're at the mercy of whatever TV you're using or monitor you're using, the quality of the cable that you're using, whatever settings you might have it at. All those kinds of things are basically potential issues between your game and the visual experience you have with it. So they looked at it and said, what if we could take that uniform Nintendo Switch portable experience, that fidelity, if you will, that goes into your brain looking at it portably, and just have that run on the television? So to that end, that's what Mode 1 is. They basically recalibrated everything to be their best guess as to what your average television user was going to want out of the Nintendo Switch when they play it. However, because they made very clear to me that the Switch obviously has a gigantic library of games and there's a lot of different scenarios and different types of televisions, that's where Mode 3 comes in. Mode 3 is basically the same concept, but with a heavier emphasis on lighting alteration. And to that end, different games look better, and some games look worse depending on which mode you use. So their recommendation effectively is while you're playing it, you just kind of cycle between the three modes, particularly modes 2 and 3, to find what Nintendo Switch game you are playing looks better at, which mode you're in. So the argument there is, I know people already say it, they're like, yeah, but my TV has all sorts of color settings and all that sort of stuff and whatever. Yes, but I promise your TV can't do it as well as this can. And your TV doesn't have all the built-in upscaling, like competent upscaling benefits, anti-aliasing benefits, et cetera, that are built into the mClassic. But I should make it very clear, yes, if you really want to tinker with your TV and completely adjust the color settings on a individual game-by-game basis, you can absolutely do that. They've attempted to narrow it down to literally just one switch going into Mode 2 or Mode 3. And then if you are really that picky from that point, obviously you could continue to fine-tune your monitor, but that's up to you. That's effectively the product value of the mClassic Switch, is that it's a Switch edition specifically. Mode 1, again, continues to be the generic one-size-fits-all mode. Mode 2, trying to recreate the portable experience on a television. And Mode 3, just trying to be an alternate settings, visual settings, mostly based on alterations in lighting within the games. That way, depending again on your monitor, you might enjoy it more or less. In a nutshell, that's what it is. Now, I found it to be like the original mClassic, I found it to be an easy enough experience to use. You plug it in, you connect everything, you power it up. There's not much that's complicated about it, and I enjoy the visual upgrades and alterations. But it's one of those things where, even when you've seen the footage in this video so far, it's really hard to correctly capture that, because the whole point of it is you kind of need to experience it in front of an actual television. Like if we were talking about in food, for example, no matter how many times I tell you something tastes great or it smells good, unless you were there to smell it and eat it yourself, you're never really going to know what I'm talking about. You'll have some idea, but that's about it. That's unfortunately kind of the problem that exists with video devices like this. I know this from years of making videos on this stuff, is what you are seeing, you can only partially represent. Because I can see it, but then when I try to capture it, my capture device sees it a different way. Then my capture device has to compress it to some extent. And then it looks different on a different monitor as I'm editing it. Then, of course, it has to be edited. Then it gets compressed. Then it gets encoded once it's part of the final video, which is what you're watching. And then YouTube compresses it again, and that's the version you're seeing. So it's just a rough approximation of what I got to see. So I would recommend, if you are on the fence about something like this, always see if you can find somebody who's local to you that already has one and you can experience it for yourself. But I will say, I think it's a pretty good experience. It definitely makes the Switch better. And we'll get back to that in a second, but there is an important asterisk. Well, there's two important asterisks with this thing that must be said. One, most Switch games run in 720p or less. And the reason that matters is, by default, the Nintendo Switch dock will try to get the switch to output at 1080p. Now, you as the end user might be sitting there in the settings and be like, oh, cool, I can run all the games in 1080p. They all run native 1080p. So when I get the mClassic, it'll run to 1440p. Awesome, that's the best ever. What? The diminishing returns. It doesn't look as good as I thought it was going to look. What's up with that? Adam's a liar. No. You have to go into your Switch and set it to 720p. And the reason you have to do that is because basically the game depends on the game. It's very specific, unfortunately, with the Switch. But most games generally run around 720p. Sometimes you get ones at like 900p. Sometimes you actually do get ones that natively run at 1080p. And then you get some weird ones that run down at like 570p or 560p or some weird stuff like, I know Ubisoft was complaining about that a few years ago. But anyway, so the point is you typically should run it in 720p as kind of an average, unless you happen to know the game actually natively supports 720 or 1080p, which you're only going to know if you do an extensive Google search on any one particular game. But the point is you do that because the Switch dock, to get it to 1080p, just kind of artificially stretches it, and therefore doesn't do a good job of it. So the mClassic, then, you're feeding it an inferior signal, so it only has so much it can work with. Whereas if you start it at 720p, closer to its intended resolution, then you let the mClassic handle it, it's going to do a much better job of upscaling it. And so therefore, I recommend that. That's easy. And the other asterisk with that, and we have to acknowledge it, is we don't know, at the time I'm making this video anyway, how far along the Switch successor is. All we know about it is that it will have some measure of backwards compatibility. We presume physically, but we don't even know that. I've heard it could just be digital is the point I'm trying to make. But assuming they allow physical Switch carts, we don't know if it's going to do anything to benefit them or enhance them. We just don't know that. But yeah, we'll find that out in due time. I guess what I'm saying is this is useful on the original Switch in its current form. I don't know how much longer it will be useful because we just don't know what's coming up next. But that's, I think, worth noting. Then you have the Retro Edition. So this one I actually found more useful, but I also say this one has a much bigger asterisk. So before we get into all that, let's talk about the specifics of it. First of all, we'll go ahead and unbox it. I mean, obviously I already did, but you can just see kind of, footage of me taking it out of the box. It's the exact same process as you saw before with the blue one. It's just the dongles in there, and then, you have the cables and all that sort of stuff. It's not that big of a deal. I do like the boxes though, especially this one, because on the back they've used Skies of Arcadia. I thought that was impressive. But yeah, so while we're talking about it, I'm going to use just some generic gameplay from various consoles here, and I promise you we'll get back to some comparison footage. Just give me a bit. But anyway, so yeah, while we talk about it. Now, the mClassic Retro Edition has, again, 3 modes. And again, like the Switch version, it does not have an off mode. So mode 1 is actually the retro 4x3 mode that was on the original mClassic, kind of a one-size-fits-all 4x3 mode. Bada bing, bada boom, that's it. That mode I always thought was amazing for things like the GameCube, the Dreamcast, etc. However, the 2 new modes, to my understanding, what actually happened, and actually the odd origin of this particular version, is that what they told me is one of the employees in the office basically rolled a CRT in one day and started just kind of playing some of their legacy stuff on the television. And the boss comes in and he's just looking at it and he's like, why does it look so much different? Like he hadn't really fully ever appreciated that before. And in that mode, he was like, we need to basically make the mClassic give the retro experience. At least that's what they told me. Because as much as I've always liked the mClassic, I have to admit I always thought it was really good at a very specific era. It's really good at the 6th gen stuff. So Dreamcast, GameCube, Xbox, PS2, especially when you have some sort of HDMI mod on them or whatever. But anything before that, like 5th gen, it was kind of a mixed bag. And then before that, really, it was like you had that Vaseline effect where you're playing something on like the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo, and like the jagged edges which we associate as pixelization, intentionally so, was just kind of smudged out just because it was a one-size-fits-all solution. And the colors didn't necessarily give you that kind of warm, glowy CRT vibe that a lot of people really seem to like. So they approached it with that mentality. So that's where Mode 1 is. Mode 1 they refer to as Vintage Mode. They specifically avoid the term CRT Mode, probably because CRT Mode would have certain expectations of scan lines or whatever. It doesn't do that. It basically alters the color palette as well as the anti-aliasing. I don't know if it actually shuts it off exactly, but it seems to do like less buffering out, specifically for 2D gameplay content. And then the third mode is basically is the same idea as the Switch one, where they said, okay, depending on your TV and what type of game you are playing and what type of console you are playing on, this is an alternate visual setting. So where this gets a little complicated is the Switch one is very clearly engineered around one particular video game console. Now, it'll work on others. Like, you could use it on the Wii U and have a great time, or whatever. But, again, that's what it's specifically calibrated to. With this one, they basically had 2 modes to calibrate a lot of different consoles. Hence, they kind of gave you a very different experience in both settings. So basically, and unfortunately there isn't like, hey, mode 2 is always 2D content and mode 3 is always 3D content or something like that. It really does seem to depend on which system you are playing and even down to which game you are playing. But that would apply the same if you were altering settings on a television itself. So their goal was, again, to get it down to 2 switches. So, in a nutshell, with these 2 versions of the mClassic, you basically would be sitting there and go between modes 3. You could do mode 1, of course, but you can do modes 2 and 3 to kind of fine-tune the specific game you're playing, which is a much easier, shall we say, solution than it would be to just fine-tune your TV on a case-by-case basis. Got it? Okay, now, we have to talk about the obvious with this thing, and they don't hide it from you. They do mention it. Requires third-party HDMI adapter, referring to a whole bunch of different consoles that are built, that are mentioned on the back. So, as I said, with the Switch, your quote-unquote bug fix, if you want to call it that, is relatively simple. It's just adjust the resolution on the Switch dock, done. By the way, it obviously doesn't work with the Switch Lite, as that one doesn't have HDMI out, but you probably understood that. With the mClassic Retro, this one is much more of a complementary device. I feel like the Switch Pro, or Switch Pro, whatever, Switch, well, like I said, it says play like a pro. The Switch, the Switch, the mClassic Switch Edition, too many words. The mClassic Switch Edition is basically is much more user-friendly in the sense that really all you have to do is plug it in and switch between 2 options. Whereas this one, you have to be a guy more like me, where you already have a lot of the infrastructure available, and then understand that this is the end-of-the-line piece that just kind of maximizes your setup. That is why the RetroTink 4K is here, because inevitably that will come up as a conversation piece. People will be like, hey, I got an NES, and I want to play it on my TV with the mClassic, how do I do that? You're going to need something like the RetroTink 4K, or a different type of RetroTink, or a FrameMeister, or an OSSC, or whatever. This is where it gets complicated, my friends. First let's start off with this. Why do I need this if I have a RetroTink? Okay, I love the RetroTink 4K. Did a video. I've done a video on a bunch of RetroTinks. I think Mike Chi is a genius, and the fact that he made something so amazing is unbelievable. But this is a very different product from this, and I think that a lot of people don't really understand that because they see it as like, thing makes game look thing better on other thing. You know, like, and I know that's caveman-like talk, but effectively that's where people kind of get it confused and assume they're kind of the same device. They're really not. The RetroTink 4K basically takes a whole host of different signals. It supports component input, VGA input, SCART input, composite, S-video input, even HDMI input, and it will basically adjust resolution, and it will make it work on a different monitor with output options of 1080p, 1440p, 4K, etc. However, while it does do some essentially re-rendering to make the games look as good as it thinks it can, it doesn't do the same level of things like anti-aliasing and color alteration, etc., that the mClassic does. Not by a lot. It's because it has to be more of a one-size-fits-all. Now keep in mind, the RetroTink 4K has a ton of setting options, like a metric ton of them. So it is conceivable, if you are an expert with those kinds of settings, that you could fine-tune individual games to get them to look exactly the way you want. Much better than your actual television can do. The idea, again, with the mClassic is it's down to 2 clicks. Like, that's kind of the goal. But where they really differ is the fact that, and it should be obvious, is that the RetroTink 4K has a ton of different inputs. The mClassic only supports HDMI input. Meaning if you wanted to use the GameCube with the mClassic Retro Edition, you need something else in between. The ideal scenario would be if you have an HDMI modded GameCube, because that will already output 480p. It will marry beautifully with this, and you will get like an unbelievable, up to a 1440p signal, as well as all the color benefits, lighting benefits, anti-aliasing, all that sort of stuff that you want out of it. Or you'd have to have, an external, device like the GCHD or whatever the case might be. But basically, every single system you want to connect to it, unless it has native HDMI output, like say the Xbox 360 or something, you're going to need to go into it knowing you need some sort of conversion device. And again, that gets really complicated because I have seen this online over the years a million times. People will be like, oh, okay, I want to use my NES on it. That sounds good. All right, so I got the yellow cables. I got those yellow cables that came with my NES, and I went to the store, and they had the AV to HDMI. It's like a yellow cable machine to HDMI. So now I've got the 4Ks, so I can use it. Don't do that. First of all, composite is terrible. You should never use it under like any circumstances. But basically what I'm trying to articulate to you is that the mClassic can only use what you feed to it, and if you feed it crap, it's not going to work too well. So you have to basically get the cleanest signal to it first, and then from there it will enhance it in a wonderful way. I like to use this as like a food metaphor. Basically, it's using all these cables and these adapters and these converter boxes. It can be very complicating, very daunting, very annoying. However, it's kind of like preparing a nice meal. Like I usually use the omelet as an example. It's like an omelet requires nice eggs, and maybe you got some fresh meat and fresh vegetables, and you're going to mix all this together. But one of them, instead of, like the recipe might be add a little bit of milk, put that in there, just going to make the eggs a little fluffier type of thing. And you read the instructions, you go, no, I'm not going to use milk, man. I'm going to pee in it. That's composite. Would you eat that like after that's prepared? It doesn't matter how good the other ingredients are. You've peed in it. You've totally ruined it. It's inedible at that point. That's basically what it's like to take all these different video cables and try to make the best video signal out of it. Is if one of them sucks, it breaks the whole thing. It is a link in the chain. It's the rusty link in a chain. That's as strong as the chain is because that is the bad one. So when I see people say like, oh, I'm going to use composite because it's just easier, it's like, no, you don't get it. That's not, you shouldn't composite to HDMI. It's an infinite source of frustration to me. However, as a user who wants to just play their games, you have every right to be frustrated by the complicated nature of this. And that is really the only flaw I would say I have with the mClassic Retro, is it goes into this expecting you to already have the pieces in place to do this. So yeah, you can take a Sega Saturn and you can use a pound cable with it and run it through it, and you'll get a signal. It'll be better than, say, like, using some composite converter, but it's not the best because you are limited by the weakness of the pound cable. So like in a hypothetical scenario where you want to do that, you would want to take something like the RetroTink 4K, output at 1080p, or 480p I should actually say, because you want to get the resolution that's the closest to the original output of the system. And then you do HDMI output to this and go on. Now that's really easy for me to say because I have a lot of this stuff already. This is made for people who really understand that this is a complementary device. And I would love to be able to tell you like, hey, this is a universal thing that everybody can instantly, easily use. And while I do think it's a great thing that a lot of people could really appreciate, it simply lacks the proper ports, input ports to really get the convenience out of it. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So as much as I love it, and I do wish that Marseille at some point would make something like this, but basically put their tech in it that allows you to just kind of have a whole bunch of different supported formats as input, and then their version of HDMI out that just kind of offers you everything. So keep that in mind. And I still think, like I said, that all of these are great devices. I still have a huge crush on the mClassic. I mean, this thing really changed my world in a lot of ways. But yeah, that said, I just think you need to go into it understanding that buying this, it's not going to plug natively into your Sega Genesis. However, If you do have a way to connect your Sega Genesis to it, you'll be very happy. So now let's do some comparison talk here. So starting with the Switch. Now, basically what I decided to do was run the same game in 4 different options. Now, 4 because one is just the mClassic doesn't exist. It's just native output of the Switch. And then you have it in mode 1, you have it in mode 2, and you have it in mode 3. And I'm just kind of going to run over it here while you see the gameplay going on. Or I've probably been doing that for a few minutes, just to give you a general sense of what the differences can be. But as I said before, keep in mind that the footage, you are seeing a very tiny interpretation of the footage through compression, through uploading, through editing, etc. So it's not a perfect representation, but all the same, I do feel like it's very important to have that. And I will do the exact same for the mClassic Retro, except we're also going to run the gamut of a bunch of different consoles. Same type of idea. So we'll start off with, post-production me will decide what order they all go in. But either way, they're all going to be there. So with that, while we just let some footage run here, I do want to say again that I do think that this is a valuable device. I think all of them are. I think that they have very good places. And I'm a huge fan of that stuff. But I cannot stress enough that there is an obvious... I don't know if I would call it a flaw exactly, because there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the expectation with the mClassic Retro is that you must have another way to connect it. Now, if you wanted to connect something like the pound cables to it, don't misunderstand. It will do its job from there. It's just that you're starting off with a weaker source. And so you're really just doing injustice to yourself. The product value in this is the fact that it makes your games look a lot better than they otherwise would. Especially with retro content where you want to try and recreate that CRT experience. And I'm on the record, by the way, I'm not a big fan of CRTs. I really am not. But I do get what people like about them. I do get that they feel more nostalgic and authentic, and that the colors are a very particular way that makes it feel warm and glowy. That is what the mClassic Retro aims to do. And I think under the proper conditions, it actually succeeds very well at that. It's just a matter of you as the end user knowing once you get it, you might also need some other stuff to go with it. However, this is important. If you are already the user who has the original version of the mClassic, I would suggest it's worth upgrading to these, or at least adding them. Basically adding them into your system, because if you have a Switch-specific one, that's useful. Having the retro one, of course, depending on which consoles you like with it, also useful. Again, it's a case-by-case basis, but I'm also very spoiled. Like I said, I have HDMI modded N64s. I have that stuff. If you don't have that stuff, you're still going to get value out of this. Just keep in mind, it can always be better. But I'll give Marseille credit. That's what they're trying to do, is make it better for you as simplistically as possible. I just hope in the future that they can make something again like the Retro Tank that takes their tech, because I truly think their tech is incredible, and puts it into a single box that offers multiple input options. I think that would just make life a lot better. But yes, huge shout out to Marseille again for sending this my way. That'll do it for now. I'll put a link in the description again if you want to check this out. Again, I do recommend them. I think they're very cool. I think they just need little bits explained and understood before you go ahead and buy it, but hopefully I've done a good job of explaining that to you. And again, thank you very much to Marseille for sending these to me. So if you guys could do me a favor, if you could like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.